All right, so in this video, we're going to look at one more kind of special application that I tend to use comprehensions for. And in particular, we're going to look at a dictionary comprehension. And more explicitly, a dictionary comprehension that we can use to sort a dictionary by the dictionary's values. All right, and the reason I chose to put this in a separate video is because there's a little bit of extra tooling, a little bit of extra concepts that we need to kind of understand before we can do this. But again, this is a situation that I find myself in, quite frequently, needing to sort a dictionary kind of in place. So we'll look at how to do that. All right, and again, there's a few things that I need to kind of talk through to kind of build up to this. Some of it we haven't covered before, so I wanted to put this in its own video. All right, so first thing to note is you've kind of seen this function, this built-in crop up a few times in some of the other videos, if you've been watching the other videos. All right, but it's sorted. So what sorted does, let's just look at its documentation. So you provide some type of an iterable, right? And there's some other optional keywords here that we really haven't used a whole lot. But you provide an iterable and it returns a new list containing all items from the iterable in ascending order, unless you put reverse equal true. So let's look at this. So I'm going to give it a list, which a list is iterable. We can iterate over a list. And this list has the elements 2, 1, 3, and 4. All right, so I'm going to pass this to sorted. And what it does is it returns to me essentially a copy of this sorted based on those values, right? So in this case, that's pretty straightforward. So our original list was 2, 1, 3, 4, and then we get back 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. So we can use sorted in that way. Another thing that we can do, if we want to get that reverse sort, we can provide that reverse argument, set that equal to true. Can't see that. And it will, essentially sort that in descending order. All right, so it's really easy to do a list, right? So we're seeing here that, hey, if I've got a list, I can just pass that and sort that. And that's pretty easy to do with sorted. But what about a dictionary? Okay, so in particular, what if we had a dictionary that looks something like this? Let me get just kind of a little dictionary in here. So let's say that prices. So let's say that we've got a dictionary of prices. All right. And we're going to have a few entries. So I'm going to say item 1. The price for that is $8.44, whatever those units are. What about item 2, maybe? All right, let's say that that is going to be $2.29. And then let's say item 3. Let's say that that is going to be $7.58. All right, so we got this dictionary. What if we wanted to return this dictionary sorted from lowest to highest cost or reverse? Right. Well, you can actually, a dictionary is iterable. So you can pass it to sorted. And let me put my prices dictionary in there. So it's actually sorting it, but what it's doing is sorting based on the key. And in this case, our keys are strings, so it's doing kind of a string sorting, right? So it actually does comparisons on strings, and it can come up with some type of a sort. But this is not what we were looking for. And moreover, it's just returning the keys, right? We're not even getting the prices back. So it's giving me back a list, which, to its credit here, right? So sorted is saying it's returning a new list containing the items from an iterable in ascending order. All right. And the key thing is when we have a dictionary, it is iterable, but it's iterating over the keys, right? So if I said 4 item in prices, right, that I can iterate over that. But when I print item, we're just getting back the keys, right? So that's the key thing. This is why this is a little bit challenging to do, is because we can hand off a dictionary to sorted, but it only is having knowledge of the keys. It doesn't have any understanding of the values. All right, so we need some tooling to help this sorted, because that's what we want to use. I mean, it's a great function. It will do that. We need some tooling to help it understand, hey, we want to get, we care about not just the key, but the value as well. And we want to sort on those values. All right. And at this point, I'm going to introduce a concept that is going to seem a little bit ambiguous at this point. Just kind of bear with me. Because we haven't formally talked about functions in this Python Fundamentals series up to this point, and we're going to have some videos on functions, definitely. But what we're going to need to do is we are going to need to use what's known as a lambda function, right? So this is the extra machinery that we need to build up, and I want to kind of walk you through exactly what that is before or in its, in this video. That's why, the extra time to walk through that is why I chose to put it in its own video. All right, so what is a lambda function? So I'm going to make a variable called my lambda, and this is an example of a lambda function. So notice when I type lambda, right? So I'm getting a boldface there, so Python recognizes this as something that's built in. And I'm just going to make a little function. All right, so what this is doing, this is defining a one-line function, a lambda function, that essentially has an argument a. So we're going to give it an argument a, and it's going to return a plus 10. All right, so lambda functions are just a very, very simple kind of way to define, again, very, very simple functions, right? So we're going to see later on, there'll be a video on, formally talking about functions, and you can do, a lot of complexity, but you have to, there's kind of some boilerplate that goes around it. So the purpose of lambdas are just to allow people to really flexibly define a function, usually maybe 1 or 2 parameters at most. You want to keep these things really, really simple. So this is a function, takes a single parameter a, and it returns a plus 10. All right, so if I were to look at the type of my lambda, it's a function, right? This thing is a valid function. And if I were to take my lambda and give it an argument of 5, it's going to return 15. All right, so I can give it the value 5, and so that's going to be substituted in for a, and it's going to take whatever that value is and add 5 to it. So, or add 10 to it. So my lambda of 5 is equal to 15. My lambda of 25 is equal to 35. All right, so we can define a little function just like this, right? We can say, well, lambda a, that's my argument, and then on the other side of the colon tells what we need to do with that argument. All right, so that's a lambda function. That is one of the pieces of machinery that we would definitely need to sort this dictionary. All right, now one thing I want to show you, so in this case we're doing basic arithmetic, but a does not necessarily have to be an integer or a string. It can be other things, right? It can be a tuple. It can be a list, whatever it is, right? So just to give you an example, right? Let's say that I have a list of tuples. All right, let's just be really simple here. So I'm going to have the first tuple is 1, 2, that pair, and then we will have 3, 3. And then I'm going to say 2, 1. All right, so I got a list of tuples here. So if we were, and here's the key thing that I want you to focus on. Notice that if we tried to sort this list of tuples by the first item in those tuples, right, we would get the first element, then we get the last element in the middle, right, because we're sorting on the 1, 3, and 2, right? So if we were doing that, based on this, the first element in that tuple, this entry would come first, then this entry, then finally this entry. What would happen if we sorted on the second element of those tuples? Right? Well, the last entry would now become first, and then the first entry in the middle, right? And that's kind of the situation we're going to run into when we're dealing with dictionaries. So how can we use a lambda to sort these by those different entries in those tuples? All right, so I'm going to redefine my lambda here, okay? And I'm going to say my lambda takes in some argument x, and let's call this my sorting lambda. There we go. So it takes some argument x, and what it's going to return, instead of returning some computation, what it's going to return is a different element. So I'm going to say, okay, we'll return x0. Okay. Now watch what happens if I call this lambda on each one of these tuples. All right, so I could say, well, for my tuple, in my tuples, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say print, and I'm going to say my sorting lambda on that tuple. So it's going to take in whatever the current value of my tuple is. That's going to be x. And in this case right now, it's going to return the first element, right? The 0th indexed element. So 1, 3, and 2. And if I want to get this second element, right, I can just change my lambda to return index position 1. So now we get 2, 3, 1. All right, so we can use a lambda. We can pass lambda tuples, like in this case, I'm saying here lambda function, here's x, right, which I know is going to be a tuple, and I can say give me either the first or the second element, right? I can tell it which index to give it back. And you can imagine you could pass it a list and say give me the 100th element if you know that, that's where you want to do that. That's what's of interest to you. But we've got a lambda function. We can pass it in tuples, we can pass it pairs, and we can use the lambda to give us back the one that we care about. All right, now let's go back. Remember, our context is we want to sort this dictionary, and I've went down this land talking about lambdas and tuples. What am I getting at? All right, well, the key thing to note is that when you have a dictionary, we can get back tuples, right? So how do we get them back? So I've got prices. Remember, we have items. All right, so we can get back tuples, right? And if we want to sort by price, it's the second element in those tuples that we care about, right? So that's why I'm showing you this piece. All right, well, this is great. You've shown me that I can grab them with a lambda function. Well, how can I use that to sort? All right, so let's keep our mind focused here on my tuples for a minute. So let me take this away. All right, so I've got my tuples. What if I were to take my tuples and just hand that to sorted? I don't know what this is going to do, but let's see. All right, so by default, it's sorting it by that first element. So 1, 2, and 3, right? So that's getting sorted, whereas our second elements are out of order. So 2, 1, and 3. All right, well, what if we wanted to change? What if we said, no, the second element in that tuple is actually what I want to sort it by? How can we do that? Well, one of the arguments to sorted we haven't talked about is key. All right. So notice right here in the function definition, it says, hey, a custom key function can be supplied to customize the sort order. So a key function. So that key is expecting a function. So we could then, it feels like, take our lambda and just say, hey, I'm going to give you this my tuples object, and I want you to take each item of that and run it through this lambda function. In this case, our lambda function is on index position 1, which is the second element, and that's what I want you to sort on. Right? So originally, this is what we had, 1, 2, 2, 1, 3, 3, and the elements in that second position are out of order. But now if we run this with our lambda function, now we've got it sorted by that second element. All right, so the lambda function is key because it allows us to quickly define a function to do that custom sorting. And now we've got all of the machinery that we need to sort a dictionary. All right, so remember prices, that's a dictionary. So what if I did something like sorted prices? We've already saw if I don't do anything else, it's just returning those elements here. Well, first off, I've got to get tuples, right? Because it's just doing the keys. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say not just prices, but I want you to take the items. So give me back the key value pairs as tuples. So grabbing those items out. And then how do I want you to do the sort? Well, what I'm going to do, so I'm handing you an item. So by calling items, I'm saying, hey, here's the first item. Here's the second item, right? And it's a key value pair. So I'm handing off a pair, a tuple. All right, so all I need to do now is say, hey, I want you to sort, the key is I'm going to hand you off X, one of those items, and I want you to use the second element or index position 1 to do the sort. So now we've sorted our keys and values or our key value pairs by that second element. All right, so this is great. So we can see the sort work. All right, well, how do we now store this into an object that matches our dictionary type of structure? Because we can't look these up, right? A nice thing about a dictionary is I can look up, we'll do a .get item 3 or something like that. But we can't do that with tuples. We'd have to iterate over and look for it. All right, well, all we need to do is recognize that, okay, well, this is essentially, if I were to look at this, so what's the type of the thing that's returned? Well, it's returning a list, as it said it would. And if I were to grab one of those elements out of that list, like the 0th element, it's just a tuple with the key and the value. All right, so we're getting back 2 things for each one of those. So we can iterate and say for each one of these, and you'll get back a key and a value. So we can put that in a dictionary. So I'm just going to make a dictionary comprehension now. And I'm going to say we'll store item and then price for item price, because that's what it's returning in that. Now you've got your sorted dictionary, right? So now item 2 is the first one because it costs $2.29, item 3, $7.58, and then item 1 because $8.54. All right, what if I wanted to do this reverse from highest to lowest? Well, I've got to look inside this sorted function. And notice if I get right in there and hit comma, do a shift tab, we've got this reverse keyword. So I can say, well, reverse is equal to true. Sorry about that. And now we've got them reverse sorted. Right, so item 1 is our most expensive item. I'm just going up here and checking the original, then item 3, and then item 2. All right, so if I save this, I'll call this sorted prices. Let me take that reverse out. So those are sorted prices. There we go. And then if I look at the type of this is in fact a dictionary. Right. So what does this look like all together? Well, it's really simple. I know we took several steps to get here, but if we have our prices, and then all we have to do, if we wanted to just overwrite that object, let's just say this is prices. Right, so that's it all together. Pretty straightforward, but again, there's a lot of little pieces because we got to understand sorted and what it means by this key. We need to know lambda functions and so forth. All right, so that is going to conclude this video, and that's going to conclude the little, I guess, mini series here on comprehensions.